Second part of the quarterback breakdown, Shaun, is going to look at the top 5 transfers. So this is first-year transfers, guys that were at a different school last year. They can be guys who are new starters or guys that have started before. It's any transfer can be on this list, Shaun. I'm going to let you kick things off with your top 5 of transfer quarterbacks. But I did want to say this, and I wanted to ask you this. I think this transfer class is significantly beneath last year's transfer class. I look at last year's transfer class with Cam Ward. You think of Riley Leonard. You think of Will Howard. I don't think this transfer class, I think the dominant quarterbacks, I mean, if you look at last year's semifinals, two of the 4 teams that were in the semifinal and the 2 teams that won both had first-year transfer quarterbacks. Veteran guys, talented players. I don't think we're going to see the same transfer impact this year. I think when we look at the top quarterbacks in the country, it's going to be returners and newcomers at places they've been. And I think that's going to be a little bit different here. But I do think there's a lot of good transfer quarterbacks. I just don't think at the top there's the same number of big-time quarterbacks. Like there's no Riley Leonard this year. There's no Cam Ward this year that not only produces but also has the big-time tools. That was my overall takeaway, Shaun. I want to get your thoughts on that, and then you can transition right into what your top 5 actually is.
Okay, I'm going to need a little help from you here because I did not write them in order. I know the 5 that we discussed, so just put it up and then get to it.
Because your first list you changed when we were talking, so so people know why. But what are your overall thoughts on the portal, the portal quarterback class overall?
Oh, it doesn't even compare to last year. It doesn't compare to last year. And this, number 5 for me is a familiar someone that actually at the end of 2023. And in the beginning of 2024, a lot of Notre Dame fans were looking at that last game of the year saying, man, I don't know. I don't want to face this kid. He looks really good. He was really good in that bowl game at 23. He started out 24 on fire.
Against who? You want to know why Jeff Brom picked the quarterback he picked in the portal this year? It's the kid that threw for 372 yards and 6 touchdowns against him in that bowl game. Shaun's number 5 is Miller Moss.
Miller Moss, man. I absolutely love the situation and the coach that he's going to. I think he's going to get the very best. We've seen his previous quarterbacks that when they got there, he elevated them and they played their very best under Jeff Brom's tutelage. So I expect the same thing from Miller Moss. I think he's going to be very intriguing to watch at Louisville in that offense. And they're going to have some talent around them as well. Running back, wide receiver.
Bell came back.
Yes.
The kid from Colin Lacey's coming back. They got talented tight ends. Their top two most talented running backs both came back. Yes, you were correct. He's going to have some weapons for sure.
He's going to have some weapons around him. So Miller Moss is number 5 for me. Number 4, let's see who I had. Fernando Mendoza.
I did text you, by the way, Shaun. I texted your list.
Okay. You appreciate it. So Fernando Mendoza is definitely going to be someone in the chat said interesting. I just think for me, I think this is I go back to the game that he played against Miami, prime time or late night when they had Miami down big early, and eventually Cam Ward put his cape on and led Miami back to the victory. But I think Fernando Mendoza showed himself very well, was pretty consistent for Cal last year. We do have an interesting conversation that we had that the quarterback coming in to Cal is going to go a long way to showing whether or not he was successful because of the system at Cal or just what he was able to do as a quarterback.
That'd be Devin Brown, who was at Ohio State. Devin Brown,
former Ohio State quarterback, yes. But, I love, once again, just like Miller Moss, I love the coaching and the system that he's going to. And he, once again, great talent at the skill position coming back in a system that he's going to be able to go into and be successful, just as his predecessor was. So number 4 for me, Fernando Mendoza, I think is going to turn out pretty well for him at Indiana. And like you said, another Notre Dame offensive lineman that's going to be blocking for him as well. Number 3, look, I know what everybody wants to say, but you can't leave, in my opinion, you can't leave Carson Beck off this list. The injury is going to play a major part in this if he can come back fully healthy. But for me, for all the detractors of what he did, especially the turnover, look, at Georgia, all you have to do is not give the game away, and more than likely you're going to win. Yes, he was a beneficiary of Georgia's talent and of Georgia's system. Yes, in the program. Yes, he was. But despite that, he came in and he put up some pretty decent numbers that led people to think that he was going to be a Heisman contender going into last year. And then, unfortunately, he underwhelmed. I think under the pressure, the immense pressure that he came into the season with, I think that's what led to a lot of the turnovers. We can get to,
and he played a real schedule. Let's be honest.
Played a real schedule.
He played in 2023 was a freaking joke.
And he lost two dudes. He lost two dudes, one at wide receiver and an all-world tight end as well. That was the ultimate security blanket in clutch situations. Like Bowers was that dude, and you saw when he went to the NFL, like that wasn't like fantasy. That was actually who he was against the best of the best. And so I think he was affected by that. But I go back to, look, I give him respect because he was the reason they got down big against Georgia. And then he was the reason that they were able to come back and make some big plays in the passing game to ultimately take the lead. But then once again, who he is reared his ugly head when they were right back in position to win the game. What does he do? He throws the interception in the end zone. So very intriguing, but he's number 3 on my list. Number 2, John Mateer, man. John Mateer. Going into Oklahoma, I think it's a great situation, Brian, because it's a situation where the expectations that are normally at Oklahoma, I don't think they exist right now. I think he comes in being able to play with his hair let loose, let his hair down, and get a ton of credit for the resurgence of Oklahoma football. And I expect that he's going to be able to do that. I love this young man.
You know what helps him a ton, Shaun? Of all the transfers, he's the one guy going with his offensive coordinator. So like all these other transfers are going to a place where they got to learn a new offense. He's the one guy that's following his offensive coordinator, or you could say maybe his offensive coordinator was brought in to get him with him. We could debate that, but he'll have the least transition to make compared to those other guys. I think that's a big part of the deal for John Mateer.
Yeah, I'm just interested in how long his leash will be. Like, is he walking into a situation where they're like, "You are the guy,"
or is he's the guy? Yeah, he's the guy because of Jackson Arnold leaving and what's behind him is not great.
Yeah. Number 1 for me, and I say this because we had questions. Caden Salter going in Colorado. I understand what the situation is. I understand that Travis Hunter is not there, but I will say this: Colorado under Deion Sanders has been able to put pretty good skill position players at wide receiver out there on the field. Travis Hunter wasn't the only receiver that they had that was pretty good. They had 2 receivers last year that were injured the majority of the year. So for me, I think Caden Salter is going to have skill position guys. Is Caden Salter going to have I said this, wouldn't it be ironic if they solved the offensive line the year after Shedeur leaves? Like, if all of a sudden the Colorado offensive line actually becomes a good offensive line and Caden Salter is the actual benefactor of that, it will be funny and it bears watching. I think the Big 12 has a chance to be maybe the conference of quarterbacks.
Shaun, I forgot to talk about that. I was going to talk about that in the first show. There's no league that I had more kids on my list that I considered for top lists than the Big 12.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Sam Levitt on your list. I had Josh Hoover. They also have Avery Johnson at K-State, who's a potential breakout player. Rocco Becht put up big numbers. That kid had 2,000-yard receivers last year. Sawyer Robertson at Baylor had really good production last year. Jalen Daniels is a guy with a big-time reputation. Noah Fafidi is a guy that 2 years ago had everybody raving about him. Like, there's going to be a lot of really good quarterback play in that league. Really good quarterback play in that league. And there's a couple other schools that have guys that I'm like, let me see how this guy does at Oklahoma State, some guys like that. But like there, for a fact, this is, I would argue, the deepest quarterback league when it comes to college production. And then, of course, you talk about Caden Salter and what he's going to bring to Colorado. This is going to be a fun year. This is going to look like an old school Big 12 league. I don't think it's because they don't have defense like they used to. I think it's just because a lot of these teams in this league have been able to go out into the portal and get some really talented football players at different positions. Yeah. You know, some of these kids are homegrown. Some of these quarterbacks are homegrown. Josh Hoover's homegrown. But it's more so like K-State can go out and get Dylan Edwards out of the portal and get the receivers that are out of the portal more so than they've been able to get D linemen and linebackers and DBs that are impactful. I think that's a big part of it as well. But that's going to be a fun league to watch this year because there's a lot of good quarterbacks coming back that have played a lot of football and produced a lot at that level. Yeah. It's going to be a fun year. Yeah. So that's your five, Shaun.
That's my five.
Was there anybody else that you looked at and said, "Hey, you know, I thought about this guy, I thought about that guy. I know that who you had originally had Carson. You had originally had
Jackson Arnold was on my list. I scratched him off of Miller Moss. I thought about Malik Murphy. I thought about a couple of other kids that transferred.
Weird situation what that was. Like you go to Duke, you do well, and then you leave to go to Oregon State. I have a feeling he jumped in the portal thinking he was going to get a lot more interest than he did. Because he jumped in the portal like right away.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he jumped in thinking like teams are going to be after me and I'm the man and then just the interest just wasn't there. For him.
But I'll name those two guys, and then I won't name some other guys that I thought about because I don't want to step on your list. Yeah.
Well, I'll start with number 5, Caden Salter for me, Shaun. This is a kid that's obviously a very talented football player, has produced a lot in his career at Liberty. The reason that he's lower on my list is because I don't know how he fits at there. Because when I look at him, you look at what he did 2 years ago at Liberty, for example, in a different system. It's a kid that passed he's on my list at 5, not because of what he did last year. What he did last year, he's not on my list. Passed for 1,800 yards, completed 56% of his passes, had 15 touchdowns passing, 6 picks. He had 7 rushing touchdowns, only 500 yards in 11 games. He's on my list because of what he did 2 years ago. When he passed for 28.76, averaged 9.9 yards per attempt compared to 7.2 last year. Had 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, had over 1,000 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Now, they didn't play a whole lot of good teams, and when he went and played against Oregon, he didn't look very good, but the whole team wasn't nearly as good. But he had really good Power 5 talent around him. You know, when you look at like the receiver they had and the production they had there, one of their receivers is a kid that transferred to C.J. Daniels kid that transferred to LSU. That LSU had last year. So he was a guy that, you know, he had some pretty good weapons around him. He's on my list because I think of what he can do. But my big question mark and why I have him as low as I did is because I just don't know how well he fits that offense. You're going to have to run a very different offense with him at quarterback compared to what you did with Shedeur Sanders. I mean, you went from you're going to a kid who rushed for over 1,000 yards 2 years ago to a kid this past year that had minus 50 yards rushing this past year. It's a very different type of quarterback, and that's something that gives me a little bit of pause on where I'm going to put him on my list. My next quarterback on the list, Shaun, is Thomas Castellanos from Florida State. Now, he's a reason that I was not high on BC last year, but he's a reason that I kind of like Florida State this year. Now, he's not even guaranteed to start. He's battling Brock Glenn for the starting quarterback job. But remember who Thomas Castellanos signed with out of high school. He signed with UCF. Who was the coach at UCF? Gus Malzahn. He's going to Florida State. The one thing we know about Gus, he's going to do what he does no matter who he has. And if he has a good throwing quarterback, he's going to bench that guy for the guy that can run. That's who Gus Malzahn is. That is what he's always going to be. That's why the best team he had at Auburn as the OC was a team that had Nick Marshall on it. Like post-Cam, when you look at the post-Cam Newton era, the best team is a team that had Nick Marshall, who was probably better off playing receiver or DB, if we're being completely honest about it, Shaun, right? So, that's just kind of how I see him, because obviously he was the OC for Cam Newton. He was the head coach with Nick Marshall. And then he went out and tried to get like Sean White, some different guys that could throw the ball a little bit, and the offenses were never any good. Thomas Castellanos is the perfect Gus Malzahn quarterback because he can throw a little bit, but he can throw not in a Bill O'Brien type of offense, but in a Gus Malzahn type of air raid dual threat quarterback. I think Thomas Castellanos is going to be a really good player to watch. The other thing I like about it is I have no idea what type of team Florida State is going to be as a whole this year, Sean. But the reality is he's going to have some kids to throw to. They went out and got Squirrel White from Tennessee, who fits that offense. They got Deuce Robinson from USC. They got Hakeem Williams coming back, who I'm a big fan of. They got Landon Thomas, who was a highly ranked recruit at tight end coming out of high school. The running backs are just okay. But the thing is, I was listening to who was it? I can't remember who it was. Somebody was breaking down Florida State, and they were talking about it. Might have been Greg McElroy, who I like as an analyst, especially when he's doing his own podcast. Like I don't love him on ESPN because he's got to do the ESPN tap dance, but when he does on his podcast, Greg is really good. And he was talking about one of the issues he has with Florida State is he doesn't love their running back room, and I'm like totally agree. But with Thomas Castellanos, you don't got to worry about that. That's not. I mean, it's kind of like. If Notre Dame had elite running backs, but if they didn't have elite running backs, they still would have been able to run the football. Kind of like LSU a couple years ago. I'm not saying this kid's Jane Daniels, but when you looked at it, you're like, hey, they didn't have great running backs 2 years ago. You didn't need to. This is a kid that 2 years ago, Sean, at BC, passed for 2,200 yards and 15 touchdowns, rushed for 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. Now, the thing with him is he's got to protect the ball better. He did a much better job of that last year under Bill O'Brien. But Bill O'Brien, this is where I talk about coaches who are just going to do their thing. Bill O'Brien, with this kid starting 8 games for him, rushed for 194 yards. That's it. Never had a single 100-yard game. This is a kid that rushed for 1,000 yards the year before. But Bill O'Brien's going to do what Bill O'Brien's going to do, and that's just what coaches are. But this kid in a system that he fits, I think he's going to have a big year. And he could easily go up on my list, but A, I'm not sure he's going to start. And B, there's just so much uncertainty, and the toxicity around that program makes me a little bit concerned about that one. Number 3 on my list, Sean, Mark Gronowski from Iowa. Now, this is an FCS transfer, which gives me some pause about, do I have him too high? Because there's been a lot of FCS quarterbacks that have gone to the next level and not performed well. But this is a kid that I think will do well, Sean. He's a very experienced player. South Dakota State has been a tremendous program, won the title 2 years ago. He's going into his 4th year as a starter. He was not a full-time starter in his first year in 2020. But then the last 3 years, he was over 2,900 yards in 22, 3,000 in 23, threw for over 2,700 yards last year. This is a kid that's got about 1,800 yards rushing in his career. He's got over 30 rushing touchdowns in his career. Has passed for 26, 29, and 23 touchdowns the last 3 years at South Dakota State. And a kid that's had to play against Power 5 schools. I mean, you want to know what he can kind of do at the next level. Now, again, Oklahoma State wasn't that good last year. But he passed for 264 yards in a loss at Oklahoma State last year and 2 touchdowns. This is a kid that's been in the college football playoffs the last 2 years. Now, this is a young man that I think has the tools to be a really good quarterback, and I think he brings an element to the table that Iowa desperately needs, Sean. They desperately need someone who can make plays as a quarterback. Not just run a system, but can make plays as a quarterback, can run around a little bit. I wouldn't call him a dual threat quarterback. I'd say he's a mobile quarterback. And to me, there's a difference. So I like Mark Gronowski at Iowa. I think he's going to have a really good season for them. Number 2 on my list is Francisco Mendoza. You had him on your list as well, Sean. I love Francisco Mendoza at Indiana. He is a passing quarterback that's mobile. He can run around. He can make some plays with his legs. He likes to extend more than necessarily take off running, but he can run. I wouldn't, again, not a dual threat guy, but a mobile pocket passer. I think he's a gritty kid. He's a playmaker. We've seen him kind of put that team on his shoulders. Now, the one misnomer that I think people have about him as well, he's going to go to Indiana and he's going to have better players. Maybe no, he had some really good receivers at Cal the last couple of years, and they worked well together. He had Jeremiah Hunter. He had Neziah Hunter this past year. But this is a kid that I think is going to go to Indiana. I think he fits that offense extremely well. Didn't throw for a lot of touchdowns, didn't account for a lot of touchdowns last year, but yards wise, he was very productive. I think that was more of a byproduct of the system, to be completely honest with you. He also had 8 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. So you started to see more of that kind of come to fruition. But this is a kid that threw for 385 yards against Wake Forest, 364 against Oregon State, 282 against NC State. And his 3,000 yards came with him not playing in the last 2 games of the season. So if you look at his average, his yards per game passing last year, he was at 273. So if he plays the last 2 games, he's at over 3,500 yards last year. So the production is good, and he'll have a good running back room. He'll have a good offensive line. He'll have Elijah Surratt. He'll have Omar Cooper coming back. He'll have a tight end to throw the ball to. So I think and I honestly considered him for my number 1 spot. But my number 1 guy on this list, Shaun, is I am going with John Mateer from Oklahoma. This is a really dynamic run-throw quarterback. There's a lot of that in the transfer portal this year. There's a lot of those dual-threat run-throw guys on the list. Obviously, Caden Salter is that. He's had a 1,000-yard season rushing. You look at Thomas Castellanos has had a 1,000-yard season as a rusher. John Mateer is similar to that. If you look at his production the last couple of years, this last year at Washington State, Shaun, he passed for 3,100 yards and 29 touchdowns. He rushed for over 800 yards and 15 touchdowns. Now, he did that against a schedule that was more of a Mountain West schedule than it was a Power 4 schedule. So he is making a jump, which is, you think Washington State, you think Power 4, but they played Texas Tech, Washington, and Syracuse and Oregon State. Those are the only quote-unquote power conference teams they played. The rest of their schedule is Portland State, San Jose State, Boise, Fresno, Hawaii, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, Wyoming. And he didn't play against Syracuse last year. So this is a kid to me that is a system quarterback, but he's a great fit for the system. And you look at what he did against Texas Tech last year, only rushed for 115 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. You're thinking, man, that guy's going to – but then look what he also did in that 21-point win. He rushed for 197 yards and a touchdown. And the reason I like him is because he doesn't have to be on his game as a thrower to still dominate. And I think guys like that make good transfer quarterbacks. Perfect example, Riley Leonard, Cam Ward, guys that didn't always have to be running the system incredibly well to be impactful. But as I said before, the one big difference with John Mateer and all these other guys on the list, as far as I know, because I don't think this is true for anybody else, sort of Thomas Castellanos, sort of. He's going to be playing for the same guy he played with the last 2 years of Washington State. And so I think that's going to help him. And he's going to have really good players around him. Now, he had good receivers at Washington State last year, but I think as long as they can stay healthy, that's obviously the big problem with receiving corps at Oklahoma last year is they couldn't stay healthy. But he's a guy that's going to have weapons around him, Shaun. The only question that I have and the big struggle I think there is actually a lot of pressure on him this year because of the pressure that's on his head coach. And so there's a lot of pressure on Oklahoma to go out and win this year, and they're putting a lot of the pressure on the reason a lot of Oklahoma fans think there will be a turnaround is because he's coming in to be their quarterback. He was my favorite portal pickup this offseason, and I think there was a lot of good portal pickups this year, but there was no elite, like high-level portal pickups like I think we saw last year. So I really like this kid. I think he's going to be able to make – and somebody in the chat said it's going to be a big jump in competition. It will be. There's no doubt. That's why I think it's so important that he's following his OC in that he doesn't have to learn a new system, but he will also have better players around him compared to what he had at Washington State as well. So those are some guys I like. Shaun, there's a lot of other portal guys I considered. I did consider Carson Beck. I think Carson Beck's overrated. Part of the reason I don't have him on my list is I don't know that we know what Carson Beck is going to be this year. This guy had a pretty significant arm injury, and I think we're just assuming he's going to be good because, that's what they say. But, this is a kid that I want to see that he's even healthy first. I'm not a big fan of him. I don't know how good that offensive line is going to be in pass pro. It's pretty good run blocking O-line, but it's not always the best pass pro offensive line. But Miller Moss he's got to prove it to me. He's talent. He's not. I don't think he's overly talented. I think he's a great fit for that system, but I'm not a huge Miller Moss fan. You have Darian Mensah, the Tulane kid who transferred to Duke. I'm not as high on him as maybe some other guys. I think he was a good player at Tulane. I considered Connor Wegman going to Houston, but he's got to show me he's got some mental toughness that he did not show at Texas A&M before I can put him on my list. Here's a couple sleepers for me. And these are guys that aren't necessarily, they haven't really started a whole lot, but some guys I'm keeping an eye on. Luke Kromenhoek at Mississippi State. He's the kid that was at Florida State last year. I like him in Jeff Lebby's offense. I like him in Jeff Lebby's offense a lot. He is not guaranteed to be the starter. They also got the Blake Shapen kid from Baylor is also there, so he's kind of the veteran. But if Luke Kromenhoek wins that starting job, keep an eye on him. I loved Ricky Collins coming out of high school. I'm very curious to see what he's going to do in that system at Syracuse. What's Devin Brown going to do at Cal? And he's going back home. He's a California kid. And then another sleeper guy to consider that I got my eye on, Shaun, is Justin Martin, the UCLA transfer at Maryland. I think that system fits him very well, and he's got a big arm. I loved that kid. Notre Dame looked at him a little bit coming out of high school. He was committed to UCLA. Really talented thrower, really talented arm. He's just very raw and he's inexperienced. But those are some other guys on my list that I considered. And then here was maybe the best portal pickup off this list. Maybe he's not one of the 5 best, but is a great pickup for that team. Loved Northwestern getting Preston Stone from SMU. It's a really good pickup. Really good pickup for them. Because I said to you, I was like, did you know? Because I actually didn't even know that he went to Northwestern until I was going through all the rosters and kind of getting caught up on who was where. I was like, holy moly, I didn't know the Preston. I mean, I knew he transferred, but I didn't realize he went to Northwestern.
That's a great pickup. Nice great pickup for Northwestern because they've been trying to solidify their quarterback situation. And hopefully, they can do it because it's a tough-minded team, well-coached team, very disciplined. Really they don't beat themselves. They just have never had that guy or the requisite talent on offense at the skill positions to really make the plays in big time matchups or fourth quarters. They were right there with Ohio State for like 2.5 quarters, and then all of a sudden the Buckeyes just took off. So they're well coached, well ran outside of the foolishness that's happened and the legal things that have been taking place. Yeah. This next topic is where I love your list. The Castellanos pick for me is sneaky good. Good because I think with that OC in that program, especially with the pressure kind of because of last year, I love guys that can walk in with expectations kind of tampered down a little bit because of a disappointing season and being able to walk in and do what they need to do and elevate things. I like that situation for Castellanos, even though, like Shaun, you said, he's in a quarterback battle.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question because I will say this. I felt very good about the 5 I had. I mean, there's other guys I like, but I felt very good about the 5 I had. What I did not feel good about is the ranking of where they were in that 5. Meaning, like, I didn't love where I had Caden Salter. For the reasons I talked about, he could be higher. He could end up not on the list, depending on how it goes. I mean, he's still got to beat out Juju Lewis also this year. He's going to get a shot to play. Castellanos, I was back and forth on where to put him. Other than Mateer at 1, there was a lot of, I'm not sure where to place guys. Did you have that struggle, or did you feel pretty good like that? Your top 5 just kind of naturally flowed, or at least your top 4 kind of naturally flowed.
Well, for me, like I said, to keep myself from having to battle, I really made my list based upon my interests, situations, and how things will go. It's not me saying, well, I think this guy is going to be better than that guy, or he's going to put up better numbers than that guy. For me, the most intriguing was that Colorado situation because of Shedeur, because of the system. We talked about this before the show. Like, does that system that Shermer runs at Colorado, does it fit, or does he have to adjust to the talent that he has in Caden Salter and what he does best? That's going to be interesting to watch. I was very comfortable with the Mendoza going to Indiana. That probably was outside of Mateer. Mateer and Mendoza were probably the 2 most comfortable with where I put them. And then after that, Carson Beck, I really wasn't comfortable with that. because of the injury, the situation that he's going to.
But the production
Miami,
is good.
The production is good, right?
People talking about the receiving core he's going to have at Miami. It's better than one at Georgia. You guys do know all of the receivers Cam Ward had last year are gone, right? Like all of them are gone. 3 of the kids went to the NFL, and then the tall kid went to Bama.
Right.
So, like, if you read any board at Miami, they're all going to talk about they desperately have to go to the portal and get wide receivers this offseason. So, if you think watching Miami last year makes you feel like they're going to have a good receiving core this year, just keep in mind, none of those guys you watched on film last year are playing for Miami this year. Now, they can end up being okay. They have a young kid that I love a lot, Nikar, but they've had to go to the port. I mean, any boards you read about Miami, they're talking about how their coaches are telling them, their sources are telling them that they're going to go to the portal for a wide receiver. I don't think Miami's recruited all that well at receiver from the standpoint of recruiting and getting them to stay. That's the thing is, like, a lot of those guys have left. Now, they do have some talent there. CJ Daniels came from Liberty or from LSU, but he couldn't crack the rotation at LSU. I like the Trader kid. JJ Trader's a good player. Nikar I like, but they've got some major question marks. And they lost Elijah Arroyo at tight end. So they've got a lot of question marks with pass catchers. And kind of like the issue that Riley Leonard had last year, where he couldn't throw in the offseason the way that he couldn't practice with him. But at least Riley could throw last spring. Carson Beck can't even throw. So, yes, Isaiah Horton. That's who I said, the tall kid that went to Bama. I love that pickup for Bama, by the way, which I've talked about before. All right, so, Shaun, we're going to get to first-year starters next. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. We would love a 5-star review. That'd be so great. We would greatly appreciate that. But, of course, as always, if you want to support us the best way you can, what's the best way to support Irish Breakdown? There's a lot of different things you can do, but the thing that's at the top of that list, above all others, is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Always the best way to support us. We greatly appreciate it. You get monthly membership, you can get an annual membership, and we have a Booster Club membership that if you sign up for a Booster Club, you will then get some free IB merch. So you definitely want to check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com.